Real-world shooting studies have a lot of variables, so let's start off with the simulated gunfight to exclude some of those variables. Shooting at a target that moves, uses cover, and shoots back is very difficult. You want to hit the central nervous system, or CNS, to cause immediate incapacitation, but you'll likely have to rely on blood loss or vital organ failure to incapacitate an attacker. It's also useful to know how many bullet impacts an attacker will take before he's incapacitated. Which leads us to another subject. What is the average number of rounds fired in a gunfight? When you look at rounds fired by officers killed or injured and compare them to the rounds fired by the attacker shooting at officers, you find those numbers are generally the same at 7 to 9 rounds. The reality is more complex though. Circumstances, distance, luck, and accuracy dictate the amount of rounds fired to stop the threat. Every situation is different. Studies can't adequately tell us how many rounds an armed citizen needs in his individual circumstances. When I use statistics that involves officers that are injured or killed, there are obvious criticisms to be made about how those statistics aren't useful to an armed citizen who is actively avoiding conflict. That may be true to some degree, but if both a civilian and a police officer end up shooting a person who is a threat, who's to say that one shooting is more valid than the other? They both ended in the same situation, regardless of how they got there. Another criticism would be that we should exclude shootings that resulted in the injury or death of the police officer because we are only interested in those shootings that result in favorable outcomes for the officer. I would argue that we can learn from shootings that ended poorly because we can learn from mistakes. Also, people can live or die from luck and access to medical attention not included in statistics. We don't have as much data on shootings that officers are not hit with gunfire. We can only use the data we do have, which primarily involves those instances where an officer is injured or killed. We have a couple of very useful pie charts that help us understand the circumstances around defensive gun use. They are from an article titled, "How Often Are Guns Used in Self-Defense? Stats." Many people would also like to know at what distance self-defense shootings take place, so they can train at that distance. This is another highly circumstantial thing that may or may not apply to you, but we can learn that most shootings take place at under 7 yards. I neglected to mention before that this chart shows the amount of attackers involved in a self-defense situation.